Okay, so we will talk about the collapse of the green energy transition because there's a lot happening, which is maybe not expected. But before we get that far, we have to look at the whole climate issue, because we are really dealing with two different beliefs. One is that we have a climate crisis, that the world will go wrong, we will die from heat or from floods or whatever. And that can be fair enough. That's a question of science and weighing the evidence and so on. But included, you have to believe in the green transition as well. You cannot say, I don't believe in wind turbines or solar cells as a source of stable energy supply. But at the same time say, yes, maybe there is a climate issue. That's not allowed. The two things go together. So just by expressing doubts about the green transition, you are a climate denier. So that's what I'm. So what's the vision for the green transition? There are many big plans out there. This is from the Danish Energy Agency. And this is a plan from last year and until 2050. And what you see here is the amount of onshore wind, solar, and offshore wind. Now it's interesting to see that the capacity in gigawatts, the capacity of onshore wind is almost unchanged because there's a huge popular resistance towards onshore wind turbines. So everything will be put out at sea, or we will have these solar panels. And as you can see from last year, we had a total capacity of some 11, 12 gigawatts. That will increase to almost 100 in the next 25 years. So we are not short of ambitions. Oops. Now what happened here? We need this one. This is the consumption that the Danish Energy Agency is foreseeing. At the bottom you have what we call the classic consumption, that is what's going on here, that's the trains, the hospitals, everything, and households. On top of that we have some heat pumps, we have transportation, electric cars of course, but then we have the big ones, and one is the data centers. We are expecting a huge increase in power consumption for data centers. And slowly, people are realizing that they cannot run on fluctuating power from wind and solar. So there is an issue. And then we have the top one, the green, and the blue hedged one are power to X, hydrogen and electrical fuels production. And half of that will be on the network with a stable supply, the other half will be off-grid, which should make it a little more simple. So, how are we doing so far? I mean, there's only 25 years to 2050. This is the share of electricity in Danish industry from 1990 and until last year. The whole industry is supposed to be electrified. That is part of achieving the climate goals. And you can see how that's going. Basically nothing is happening. Because yes, you have furnaces or you have heating equipment and so on, and that could in principle be electrified. But it's costly, it's a lot of investments, and there's not much motivation for doing that. So people keep on using natural gas, oil, or whatever they use. We're supposed to reduce the emissions of CO2, carbon dioxide. This is a result from the German power supply. This is only from 2019 to 2025. And you can see this is grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour produced. In that period, they have installed a huge amount of solar panels and a huge amount of wind turbines, and there's no effect. Basically, there's no effect. They are still emitting huge amounts of CO2 in connection with their power supply. And why is that? It's because whenever the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow and they can't import everything, they have to rely on their coal-fired power plants. And it's coal, it's also lignite, brown coal, which is even worse. And they're still using a lot of that and still emitting a lot of CO2. And we've seen this one several times already, the energy consumption in the world still totally dominated by coal, oil and gas. And then there's a little bit of nuclear hydropower and a little bit of solar and wind on top. But nothing. There is no transition because the amount of energy consumed has increased all the time and we've just added a little bit with solar and wind. How does it work, solar and wind? This is the figures from the Danish energy supply in 2024. So what you see is for the whole year, these are hourly samples. So what you see is the combined production from wind and solar, that's the red curve, and the consumption, that's the blue curve. And it's obvious that we have a problem. Houston, we've got a problem here. Because they don't match. Now we have installed, as I mentioned, around 12,000 megawatts. We very rarely get up there, but we are close sometimes. But it, of course, has no match whatsoever with the consumption. And that's where we have to do a lot of other things. This one is an interesting graph. It's from the Danish energy distributor, Energinet. And what you see here is what proponents of wind and solar always state. They will always tell you, yes, but when the wind doesn't blow, the sun will shine. And when the sun doesn't shine, the wind will blow, right? And you can see that in the middle of the day, the wind stops blowing a little bit, but you have the sun instead, and you get a more or less stable supply. Now, isn't that nice? And I was wondering a bit, because that happened day after day. But there is an explanation for everything. Basically, what happens is that when the sun picks up, the owners of the offshore mills switch them off. Because prices are zero, or maybe even negative, and there's no point in running the mill, so they switch them off. And then in the afternoon, as you can see, around 5 o'clock or so, they put them back on again. And that's why people in Denmark are wondering when they drive around in the landscape, why are all these wind turbines not working? Yeah, well, sorry guys, but there's no market for the power. But this problem is not really a Danish problem, because you could see that even in this one here, we actually, we have to go back one more, we actually do not fulfill, because the gray bars are the consumption, so we don't really match the consumption. And that's because we are importing from Germany. What is happening in Germany? This is the German power supply in the same week, it's in May this year. And notice the yellow patches, that is the contribution from solar cells. Every day. They have now a consumption which is in the range of 50 gigawatts. They have installed 100 gigawatts of solar power. And a lot of that power is private households, and the government cannot switch them off. They can, and we get back to that because it's even worse. They cannot switch them off. So all this solar power is just coming into the grid. And what do you do then? Well, then you have to switch everything else off. Or you have to export to Denmark, which then has to switch everything off. And some of the power we pass on to Norway and Sweden. Good luck with that. But you can see what happens. The wind during the day, when you have this huge amount of solar power, the wind is cut back Gas and coal are cut back as much as possible, but they cannot switch them off completely because they need it to stabilize the grid. We'll get back to that also. And this is day after day, this is what's happening in Germany. I mentioned the prices of power, and that has become a joke these last few years. This is from June this year. What you can see is that basically this is just 1 month of data, hourly data again. What you can see is that every night the price is high, every day it's around zero and sometimes well below zero, which means that if you are a power supplier, you have to pay to get rid of your power, which doesn't seem to make too much sense. Some people say, oh, this is nice. I mean, it's almost cheap power. I can charge my car. I can do this. I can do that. Yes, but I mean, this is not a healthy system. If you go to the supermarket and you buy a pint of milk, and one day it will cost you $1, and the day after it will cost you nothing, or the supermarket will pay you to take your 1 pint of milk, that doesn't make sense. And that's basically what we see here. Prices are just going up and down like that. So here's another example. This is from the 14th of June this year. Again, you see the same picture. Wind is being cut back, and the solar is just on top. And again, we have been importing at that time. And now we can look a bit closer to what's actually happening. This is the same day. You have the yellow curve, that's the Danish solar cells. You have the dark blue. That is the offshore wind turbines, which are being switched off during the day, of course. And then you have the what do you call it, hatched line there, stable line, and that is the exchange with Germany. And during the day, Germany is exporting a huge amount into Denmark. Up to, I mean, our consumption is around 4,000 megawatts and they are about 3,000. So it's almost all our consumption they are shipping off to Denmark, and we are shipping some of it off to the Norwegians and Swedes. And then in the evening or the late afternoon, when the sun stops shining, then the export from Germany turns into import instead. And you can see the red curve at the bottom is the price, and there's the scale on the right side. So you can see that the price during the day, when you have the party going, is negative, and then in the morning and evening, it's fairly expensive. And here we can see what the Germans actually are paying for their power. At the bottom, you have the export or import from Germany. So the export to Germany is on the left side. That means that's when the Germans are importing. And on the right side, you have when they're exporting. And these are all the prices, one by one, for 2 months, May and June 2025. And what you can see is that they are always exporting at low prices and importing at high prices. So Germany is losing a lot of money on this account here. And this is the situation in Germany. Here you have the green areas on top are the subsidies that the German government is paying daily to the suppliers. I mentioned these households with solar cells on the roof. They are paid a guaranteed minimum price every day for every kilowatt hour they produce. And we are talking about big money. We're talking about 8-10 euro cents per kilowatt hour. And the German government, even if there's absolutely no use for the power, and the Germans have huge problems getting rid of it, they still have to pay the people every day. So that's the green amounts. These are the daily payments that you can see here, or actually the hourly payments you can see, no, daily payments, sorry, in millions of euros from the German government. Then you have the red. That is the loss that they have every day in the balance between their imports and exports, because they are exporting cheaply and importing more expensively. It's not only Denmark, it's also to France, for instance, quite a lot. French are earning a lot of money on that. And sometimes when it's really bad, it's also Poland. And then you have the small blue areas, that is what their export actually is worth. But we are talking about per month a couple of billion euros that the Germans lose on this show here. Some of it paid by taxpayers, some of it paid by ratepayers, but it is the nation that loses a couple of billion euros per month. We talked about negative prices, and this is again for Denmark this year, and we have the accumulated number of hours month by month. And you can see it starts, the party starts in March, and then it goes up, and in July we had almost 350 hours in total in Western Denmark, which is Jutland and Fyn. And then the east, which is Zealand, and the capital, is a little less. They're working more or less independently of each other. Just yesterday evening I picked up the figures for August, and there you can add another 50 or so hours with negative prices. That's a lot of hours where nobody is getting paid for the power. You'll also notice another interesting thing is that in April, May and June there was a quick increase in the number of hours, but in July there was very little. Power was very expensive in July in Denmark, and one reason is that there was not much wind, neither in Germany nor in Denmark, and then the price keeps up. But it's a mess. I mean, if you run a business and you're supposed to pay prices like that, how can you plan anything? What does it cost? There's a lot of discussion about the cost of solar and wind. They are cheap, they're the cheapest in the world, and they will get even more cheap. And that's why the green transition will work out by itself. Because people are just flocking towards this, stampeding towards this cheap energy sources. But in the UK, Great Britain, they have these auctions where they basically agree to fixed prices with the suppliers of wind turbines or wind turbine power and solar. And here you can see some examples of the latest maximum amounts that the UK government is willing to pay. And we are talking about 9 cents almost for solar, onshore wind 10.6, offshore wind fixed 13, and then since there's not too much space in the water, they're talking about they need some floating wind turbines as well, and there you're up at 31.3. And finally we can take tidal power. And we should just remember that before 2020 the price of power in Europe was 3 to 4 cents. So any illusion that the so-called renewable energy is the cheapest in the world, that is nonsense, to put it mildly. Then we have the famous Iberian blackout, which was mentioned briefly. That was a little bit of an eye-opener, I think, to many people, but of course a lot of people will deny that there ever was a problem. There has been issued several reports. The government has been very reluctant to discuss in detail what happened, but this is a curve showing the tension in the high tension system. That should be around 410 kilovolts, and you can see it is all over the place from 390 up to 430 in the hours before the event. The event was at 12:30 something, and from 9:30 onwards you started getting these very big fluctuations. And the Spanish power authorities were trying to regulate. They switched off the imports from France or export to France and to Morocco and to Portugal. They were just turning all the handles. But they had one episode after another of this wild fluctuation. And then at the end, it got worse. Just after 12 o'clock, you ran into the most serious frequency problems, because when you have an electrical supply, you have two things. Now, this is alternating current, right? So you have the frequency of the current, which should be 50 hertz, and you don't really want it to be too far away from that. And then, of course, you have the voltage also. And both of those have to be kept within narrow limits. And then they started having these frequency problems to start with. And at a certain stage, there were some solar parks that switched off. Most electrical equipment has some kind of limits, and if they are exceeded one way or the other, it will switch off automatically to protect it. And what actually here triggered the collapse was that 3 solar parks switched off on that account. And then finally, a few seconds later, you had the total blackout. And there was basically nothing they could have done to prevent it. This shows the production of electricity just around the time of the collapse. You can see in the morning there was a lot of solar. I mean, the consumption is around the 20 gigawatts, so they were exporting. Then they had some wind. They had some hydropower, and at the bottom there's a little bit of gas and a little bit of nuclear. Actually, the nuclear power plants, also because of these fluctuations, they were cut off. But they managed to catch that one. But then it collapsed, and it took 16 to 24 hours to restore the power to everybody. And we all know that it was, in many ways, a tragedy. But notice that here you have 2 gigawatts of gas and 3 gigawatts of nuclear. The Spanish government were aiming at, these were political ambitions, that they should run it entirely on renewable energy. Only solar, only wind, nothing else. So gas and nuclear was pushed down as much as possible. During the morning, when they had these fluctuations, somebody got nervous, and they called the power plants and said, could you start a few more gas-fired plants? And the answer was, yes, we can. Within 12 hours, they will be up and running. Yeah. So they were stuck with this. Now you can see from the same web page 1 month later, the picture is basically the same, but you will notice now there's a lot more gas and nuclear in the picture. They are simply not allowed to go that low anymore. So this ambition of running the whole grid entirely on solar and wind, I think that's a bit in trouble right now. Then, of course, there are big plans for the future. These are visions for the North Sea. There was a big meeting in 2022 with the Danish Prime Minister, with Ursula von Leyen and some other Prime Ministers. And they said, okay, we will expand in the North Sea with 150 gigawatts. Right now there are some 13, 14 gigawatts in the North Sea, and they want to expand that to 150. And the first step was the expansion in Denmark. The idea was to install 6 gigawatts. And they had the auction last year. Conditions were severe. I mean, there was no government support whatsoever. They even had to pay for the lease of the land where they would put the wind turbines. But everybody was optimistic, and this would just work out beautifully. And so in December, it was the 3 pieces you can see, the North Sea 1, that were up for auction. And then there were there's 3 gigawatts, another 3 gigawatts in the inner Danish waters. So on some day in December, the Danish Energy Agency was awaiting, looking at the inbox and awaiting all these offers, and none came. Not a single offer. Oops. And afterwards they, of course, tried to analyze what went wrong. And the reason was that because the bidders, the potential bidders were interviewed. And they said, well, there are two things. One is that the market price level for power is too low. We cannot make money with that kind of prices. That's like we just saw in the UK. And the second thing was the uncertainty. Because whenever there's a good production, ample production, then the price falls to zero or less. And then we have to switch off, or we have to give money away. And that actually made up the problem. And this is not an isolated Danish thing. It has happened in a string of other countries. In the UK in 2023, they had an auction for 4 gigawatts, and there were no bidders. Then they raised the guaranteed prices, not to the level that you saw before, but somewhere in between. And there they got bids for some of it, but not for all of it. There were still 6 gigawatts out there that nobody was bidding for. In the Danish case, the Netherlands had also a big auction where at least part of it never materialized. And finally, Germany, very recently, where there were no bidders either. In Germany, interestingly, the reason was, among others, that these wind turbines would be located so close to each other that they sort of shield the wind from one another. And that is a considerable production loss that they would suffer. So, and then of course we have the story about the Swedish wind. Correct me if I'm wrong, but these are the figures for 2017 to 2022. The revenue, the money that they got in from selling the power is on the left, that's 34.4 billion Swedish kroner. But the costs were 47. So it's a huge loss-making operation. And what on earth is going on? What actually is going on is that the Swedes are more sensible than the rest of us. And why is that? That's because the clients who buy this power from the windmill operators, they said, okay, we would like to buy power from you, but you have to supply all the power that we need, and you have to supply it stable. So day and night and whenever we need it, you're supposed to supply it. And the Swedish wind companies said, yes, okay, we'll do that. And they offered a price, and it was a fixed price for 10, 15, 20 years. And then they said, okay, we will produce whatever our turbines can produce, and then the rest we'll buy and pass on. And then, meanwhile, the prices of electricity went up. So suddenly they had to buy very expensive power and sell it at a guaranteed low price. Yeah. And that basically knocked out the whole business. So we have companies which are now in financial trouble, and this is just a selection. I'm sure that you can think of more. Of course, we have Northvolt in Sweden with the batteries, the big adventure. We have 2 suppliers of solar cells in Denmark, Upton and Better Energy. They are very close to being bankrupt, and we really don't know what's going to happen. And then you have the Swedish wind companies, Markbygden, Aldermyrberget, which basically are bankrupt also, because they have no money. And then we have DR Ørsted, our Danish wind farm developer. And we get back to Ørsted right here. Sunrise Wind, a big park, where is that here? Outside of New York. And they got a contract in 2018 with a fixed price for every megawatt hour of $110. And then they came back and said, no, we cannot. We cannot build, we cannot make money on that price level. So there were negotiations with the government. This is where Joe Biden still was president. And they said, okay, we will agree to $146 per megawatt hour. Now that is fairly above the normal power price, also in the US, where you can get gas power for $50, which is a third basically. Now Ørsted are going to complete the project, but they need a lot of money to do that. And the plan was they would sell off half of it to somebody else. Find some idiots who don't know too much, and they should pay for half of it. And nobody wanted. So now Ørsted is in trouble because they're missing the money to complete the project. And then they are now coming back to the Danish government, which is part owner, and saying, oh, we need some more capital. And we will see how that ends up. Meanwhile, they have another wind turbine park which has just been stopped. It's 80% completed. It's been stopped by the Trump administration. It's a bit unclear why, but we'll see how that ends up. And what's the remedy to all this? As we've already seen a couple of times, it is government subsidies. The green revolution, the green energy transition is only working when it's greased with public money. Taxpayers. Now these colors are just the darker the worse. I mean, I don't know all the details, but I know that Germany, Denmark, and the UK are very, very bad. We are pouring out money to support this. I mentioned this auction for the wind turbines in the North Sea. Now he's coming back, our energy minister, and saying, okay, we will have a new auction, and this time we will offer government subsidies to the tune of 55 billion Danish kroner over the next 15, 20 years, which would be some 8 billion euro. That's a fair amount of money. And then we have countries like Norway, Belgium, Holland, and France, which are also giving subsidies. Finland maybe a little less. You'll notice that I didn't call us Spain or Poland. I don't really know how much they pay, but I know that a lot of what they pay is paid by the EU. So they basically just channel EU money into these projects. That's much cheaper, much more rational, isn't it? And finally, the hydrogen adventure. Because as we saw in the beginning, the Danish Energy Agency expects hydrogen production and power to X to be the big off-taker of all this power. So let's see how that works out. We are up against physics. It will cost you typically 50 kilowatt hours per kilo of hydrogen. There's really no way around that. And if we say we are paying 10 cents per kilowatt hour, which we have seen is the level, then our power cost for the hydrogen will be €5 just for 1 kilogram. And on top of that, we have all the other costs: investments, handling, equipment, and the transportation, and so on. So minimum 8, maybe 10 euro per kilogram of hydrogen. And the guaranteed price, there was one contract in the UK where they promised 9.5. So we are at this level. Now, if you produce hydrogen from natural gas, which is done in huge volumes, then the price is around 1.8 euro per kilogram. And our dream in Denmark is to produce all this. We have all the wind turbines, we have all the power, we produce all the hydrogen. It's shipped via a pipeline to Germany. You can see the pipeline up there, the blue one. And then the German customers are just waiting to get this hydrogen. But look at the prices. Now I'm being nice, I'm saying, okay, we sell it at 8 euro per kilogram, which is on the low side because you have transportation costs and everything. And that corresponds to around 240 euro per megawatt hour. German industry is using natural gas for steelworks, for all kinds of high temperature processes, and they pay 40 euro per megawatt hour. That's 1/6. they also say they will use some of this hydrogen for power plants. They're supposed to build some gas power plants now, and they should convert into hydrogen. But the price, I mean, again, here you will lose half the energy. So we are up at 500 euro per megawatt hour, whereas the current power prices in Germany, which are high enough, are 40 to 80 euro per megawatt hour. So it's 5-6 times on top. And this is just a long, sad list of all the hydrogen projects which are in trouble or which have been closed down. I will not go into detail with all of them, and I know that I probably have forgotten a lot. But this is just how miserable it is. They're reduced, they're cancelled, they're put on hold, they're converted to something else, or what. Basically, the whole hydrogen business is at a standstill. And the bottom company, Green Hydrogen Systems, was supposed to make electrolyzers, the machines that actually produce all this hydrogen. And they went bankrupt because nobody bought any electrolyzers. Big surprise. So, conclusion. The energy from solar and wind is intermittent. It's not stable. It cannot replace a traditional power supply. And this, we have to get our politicians, and now we're back to the communication, we have to get our politicians to understand this. It's not, whenever you talk about now we're building one more solar cell park or one more wind turbine park, they clap in their hands and say, oh, this is great. No, it's not. It's just one step further down the slippery slope to nowhere. And the more capacity we install, the more problems we have. We have the economical losses, we have the unstable power, like we saw in Spain. And what we see now is that the further expansion is slowing down. And the whole hydrogen adventure has basically gone bankrupt. So, solar and wind will not achieve net zero. Thank you.